good. So let's get right into our presentation on Barry Arm landslide and tsunami risk. And we have Dave Snider and Gabe Wolken. So welcome.
Robert, this is Joe Lally. I'm just going to give a brief introduction.
Sure.
And Mr. Snider and Mr. Wolken will begin with their presentation. So I just wanted to give the board and everybody present today just a brief update on this agenda item. So during the summer of 2020, there were 3 massive alpine landslides detected in the Sound, and something that's not historically unusual, but it did raise some attention and awareness on the risk of a tsunami occurring. And concurrently, there's some concern about potential of a tsunami occurring in the Barry Arm near Whittier Glacier, because there's an unstable mountain slope above the toe of Barry Glacier that has the potential to fall and cause a tsunami. So why is this important to the RCAC? There's definitely interest in monitoring the geological hazards present in Prince William Sound that could pose a risk of a landslide-induced tsunami. There is currently on the for FY22, there's a proposed project titled Review of Geological Hazards in Prince William Sound that's sponsored by the Port Operations and Vessel Traffic Systems Committee that's being considered for this for fiscal year 22. So that definitely shows that there's interest in this situation. And the project is to investigate geological hazards in Prince William Sound that might pose a risk to oil spill prevention and response infrastructure, and is included again in this year's proposed project list. So with that, I will introduce Dave Snider. He is the Tsunami Warning Coordinator with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's National Tsunami Warning Center. And Gabe Wolken is with the Division of Geological and Geophysical Surveys. And with that, I will turn the time over to them to give their presentation.
Okay, hi everyone. I think we've discussed the order here. I'll go first and then Dave will follow. Just gonna share my screen here. Okay. Okay, so let's just set the stage with an introduction one more time here. Yeah, so I'm Gabe Wolken, and I manage the Climate and Crisis Hazards Program for the state of Alaska. And in doing so, we investigate changes in snow, ice, and permafrost, and in a lot of cases, how those changes impact the landscape and generate hazards. The hazard that we're talking about today is the unstable slope in the Upper Barry Arm in northwest Prince William Sound. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this area, and the view in the photograph here in the title slide is probably a view that you might be familiar with if you've been to this area. And in the background, it does show the area of unstable slope. And I guess one thing to keep in mind here is you might be thinking, well, this is fairly unremarkable. And the fact of the matter is this in fact is very common in Alaska and the fjords throughout South Central and Southeast Alaska and down into British Columbia. This is common in fjord landscapes all over the world. And what we're confronting right now is just a larger presence of a hazard in this particular fjord as it has been identified. The glacier-related unstable mountain slopes throughout the fjord areas of South Central and Southeast Alaska are increasing in frequency and size, and those near coastlines have the potential to generate, at times, destructive tsunamis, and that's our primary concern. So this hazard presents when glacial retreat exposes oversteepened slopes while simultaneously creating larger water bodies beneath them. So in this case, you'll see that the Berry Glacier has retreated rapidly over several years, and certainly starting about 2 decades ago. And the biggest concern then is that that stabilization source, the glacier, is now allowing the slope to relax. We're seeing large landslide behavior. Coupled with that, of course, is permafrost warming in some of those higher areas. Permafrost thawing can expand fractures, reduce the cohesion of the sediments in between the rocks, and it really leaves the mountains unstable. And so there's that added issue. And so in the past, there have been many of these situations in Alaska. So this is not uncommon. In fact, some of the largest tsunamis in the world have been generated in Alaska. And I'm thinking of places like Tanfjord and Lituya Bay. And so these are highly destructive tsunamis that are generated locally when mountains collapse and fall into the fjords. And they're different than earthquake-generated tsunamis in that they're local. And in being local, they have a pretty immediate effect. And that's a bit of a danger, because when that happens, there's very little warning, and people out on the water don't have time to react in most cases. And then farther away, it's an issue as well. So in places that, in communities nearby, and infrastructure could be damaged as well if the landslide event and the tsunami that's generated is large enough. So let's set the stage here. The area that we're talking about, of course, for the Berry Arm is in northwest Prince William Sound. And this area, highlighted by the box here, is about 60 miles east of Anchorage, about 30 miles northeast of Whittier. And again, I think many of you are probably familiar with this area. You've traveled around in this area. Okay, from the air, this is what it looks like. This is a view showing the Berry Glacier as labeled there in Upper Berry Arm. To the left is Cascade Glacier, and just to the right is Cox Glacier. The two slide masses that we have been focusing on are slide A and slide B, identified here in red. The main unstable slope, A, is above the toe of the Berry Glacier, and it's about 1.6 miles wide by about 0.8 miles high above the ocean floor. So it's a very large unstable slope, and the main unstable mass is estimated to be about 1.4 square miles. And the estimated volume that we have right now, and this is kind of a moving target as we learn more about this landslide, it's around 650 million cubic yards. So if you want to put that in sort of real world terms, you could pack in around 500 Empire State Buildings into that area. Okay, so a little bit of the history here. I mentioned that there's been a lot of change here. And so the map here that you see on the left does describe some of the work, and the right side, the graph, work done by Chun-Li Dai and others from Ohio State University. It shows the sequence of motion detected with Aster and Landsat imagery, satellite imagery from around 2000 to the present. And you can see the sequence of behavior of Berry Glacier from right around 2005, where it was co-located with Cascade Glacier, sorry, on the left-hand side there. And it retreated from 2005 to 2013. You can see its location relative to landslide A, and then its location in the image, which is from July of 2019. So if you turn your attention to the graph here, the top graph shows the retreat of Berry Glacier over time. And so those red marks indicate kind of samples of the glacier terminus over time. And that retreat, which began right around 2006 or so, it started happening in earnest. And the bottom graph there shows landslide motion. And so you can see that both the glacier terminus change and the landslide motion co-vary. And so as one retreats, the other one moves. And that synchronous movement is what is telling about this landslide system, and that it is indeed controlled largely by the position of Berry Glacier, both in terms of where it is in its position in the fjord, but also how much it's decreasing as it downwastes or melts. And so that's also a really important factor here. Okay, so it's clear that during this time period, the landslide movement is strongly coupled to those different features of the glacier. Okay, so the main motivation for our efforts here, for our concern, is the potential for a tsunami to be generated. And what we're showing here is a tsunami scenario that is considered the worst case scenario if the entire mass fell into the fjord as a single block and generated a tsunami. And this is produced by Dr. Patrick Lynette from University of Southern California. And this initial simulation, again, it shows that rapid full slope failure. And as part of our goal here with the work that I'll be showing you from this point on is to help the tsunami modelers refine these simulations to do a much better job at this. And I think what's important to know here is that this is our best guess right now what the impacts of something like this could be. And so what we are doing is really trying to get as much detailed data as possible to help describe the behavior of the landslide currently, the different components that can help the tsunami modelers do a better job with refining some of these scenarios, and then helping to understand how the behavior of the landslide could produce a range of different tsunamis if and or when it fails and plunges into the water. And so that's the main goal for us looking at the landslide specifically. Okay, so on to some of this landslide monitoring and motion detection. In June, we began satellite and aerial monitoring of the unstable slopes in Berry Arm. And what you're seeing here is some satellite radar data that allows us to look at the landslide motion in very fine detail. Okay, so we can see centimeter scale movement here, but the images that are available for this are separated by about a month in time. And it turns out that's okay for this because the scale of movement on the landslide right now is actually quite low. And so that time spacing, about a month in between sampling, allows us to actually detect the movement pretty well. So this analysis being done by Lauren Schaefer and others at United States Geological Survey. And the analysis of the repeat satellite radar measurements indicate very little movement during the summer of 2020, between say June and October, except for a small amount of movement at the toes of both landslides A and B as indicated in these different areas here and here. I know there'll be some lag for that. So the deformation mapping in late September through early October shows around 25 centimeters of movement of the main slope. And so toward the fall, there was a little bit more motion that was detected with these satellite sources on the main landslide, the landslide A. And so, you know, up to a little less than a foot of movement was detected within a couple month time period. Okay. To really augment the satellite monitoring, we employed a few other aerial mapping resources. And this effort was really critical for developing baseline data for landslide mapping and characterization. And so we conducted repeat airborne LiDAR and photogrammetric data. These airborne acquisitions are really important because, as many of you know, Alaska is lacking a lot of updated baseline data. And so for this area in particular, We really didn't have much at all to work with. We had an elevation model that was pretty coarse to work with, and no detailed imagery whatsoever. And so our goal really was to map the topography in as high resolution as possible. Plus, as you recall from the previous slides, this is brand new terrain. And so since 2005, this is brand new terrain to Alaska. Since that time, it's been uncovered. So we have brand new segment of ocean, and we have new land exposed that was previously covered by glaciers. Okay, so what we did is we flew a laser, and you can see here connected to the helicopter is a picture of it. We flew a very high resolution survey with a very precise laser to map the topography. And then we also flew some missions to collect very high resolution images of the landslide. Some of the products we developed are shown here. On the left-hand side, you can see some high resolution imagery, about 2 centimeter pixels on that, and then about 9 centimeter pixels on the elevation model on the right-hand side. And so these are some of the products that were gathered with these airborne mapping efforts that we did. And so this allows us to map and assess the unstable slope in as much detail as we can, given the resources that we have from these available data. The information will help the tsunami modelers refine the simulations and provide the critical information to decision makers regarding the monitoring that's required and the warning systems that should be associated with the hazard. So the repeat LiDAR complements the satellite radar data and allows us to perform some change detection analysis and assess the movement on the slope. And so we were really interested in how it was moving and in the ways in which it was moving. And so the analysis we performed confirms the pattern of slope-wide movement detected by the satellite radar analysis. So this area here, we showed with the LiDAR data that was also moving in the same way and the same amount. So that was really good to have confirmation of this. LiDAR data provides a little bit more detail. And for instance, we identified other unstable features near the ridgeline above the main unstable mass. And so in this area here, a very large rock avalanche sourced from right at the ridgetops ran out onto the main slide here, which narrowly missed one of the Alaska Earthquake Center seismic stations that was deployed out there last summer. We also identified movement in this area over here to the left, which appears to have moved faster than the main slide mass between June and October last year. And so that moved around 1.5 to 2 meters. Okay, so these are the things that we're keeping our eye on. And so we're beginning to refine our thinking about the dynamics of the slope, and we're creating some very detailed maps and structure maps of the way the landslide moves. But I think the important takeaway here is that we consider the entire slope to be highly unstable. And so really considering this entire area here to be the dangerous zone for this area. All of it has been recently exposed. All of it is subject to motion. And this doesn't change our interpretation nor the warnings that we issue. It's a highly unstable area. So recently, preliminary analysis of radar satellite imagery by USGS indicates no detectable motion since late October 2020. And so just a few small rock falls that have occurred onto the slopes that are now snow covered. And the Alaska earthquake seismometers in this area have also detected some of those small rock falls and some noises in the area as well. I want to point out another really important asset that we now have, and this is in addition to the airborne and satellite remote sensing efforts. NOAA conducted a ship-based bathymetric survey acquiring important information of the newly exposed seafloor this newly exhumed part of the fjord extending to the north-northeast, just below the unstable mass. So this is really important, as it really enables the production of a topographic bathymetric combined map, or a topo-bathy map. This is important because what we can do then is monitor the landslide not just in the portion that's above the water, but also below the water. And this line right here indicates the line that makes that transition between subaerial, or above water, and submarine. And so we have plans then to go back using this fantastic NOAA acquired baseline data acquired last summer, go back and do repeat surveying with some smaller but sensitive instruments where we can start to monitor the behavior of the slope below the water line. And that's important because we have reason to believe that this entire mass is moving also below the water. We don't have a really clear indication of where the toe of the landslide is yet. And so that's something that we're really interested in measuring. Okay, so just the summary of some of the things that we've done so far. And this map shows the areas in green here where the radar sat imagery has been collected, and where we continue to work with our USGS colleagues to analyze data here. The red area here and the blue area indicate areas where we have surveyed either with imagery, photogrammetry, or with laser scanning using a LiDAR system. And we will continue to do that to monitor from a remotely sensed position the movement of this area. I'll also point out that this seismic station that I mentioned previously, located here, and then there's another one located here, which also has a camera on it. These are really valuable resources deployed by the Alaska Earthquake Center. Allows us to keep eyes on the slope directly with the camera when it's not buried in snow. It's been a pretty heavy snow year over here. And then it also allows us to use those sensitive instruments to detect any changes in the unstable mass. In the future, we have some other things coming into play here, and Dave will talk about the deployment of some tsunami gauge sensors that will be deployed in Barry Arm. And then the Alaska Volcano Observatory is helping out with deploying some infrasound sensors in the Whittier area, which will help us keep an eye on the landslide and hopefully provide some early warning to any large failure that should occur when we don't have any other sources in place. For instance, this winter, before we can deploy any other monitoring devices on the mass itself. I will point out the recent updates to the website that we have from Barry Arm, which actually went live today. You can go to this address here, or you can simply type in Barry Arm and State of Alaska into your search engine, and it should take you to this. What we've changed here is at the very top, there's a status report that provides the updates on any relevant information about the slide, and provides detailed information on the changes and the analyses that we've done. Over on the right-hand side, there's also a lot of information on some other pages about the slide itself, why it's important, and of course, the preparedness information that has been prepared by NOAA, and Dave will speak more about that here shortly. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Gabe. Awesome, okay. So Gabe has taken us from the initial part of the problem to pretty much what happens if a large amount of the rock and landslide drops into the water there. So the real question then is what are we going to do about it? And we do need to monitor the rock and the shape of the slope and everything under the water to have a better understanding about what can happen. But at this point, we don't have a way to know if that has happened and then alert any of the Prince William Sound communities that something has happened and to get out of the way. We're going to talk a little bit about where we're going from there. So once again, this is a natural partnership, but a new partnership across all of these different agencies from the state of Alaska and where Gabe works and many other groups within that, including the State Alerting Authority, which is out of the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. NOAA, USGS, of course, the Coast Guard and the Forest Service have all been involved in moving these pieces together, and it's a unique opportunity, but a good thing that's happening from all of our different groups, state and federal combined, and of course working toward the local situation where you are. As Gabe mentioned, landslides and glacial fjords are not a new thing for us. This is a common occurrence. This is something that we can look back through time and see this has happened in many places, not just in Alaska, but all the way down the southeastern coast into British Columbia and even the West Coast, even not glacial fjords, but other other valley areas near the ocean in places like Hawaii. So this is a well-known risk. And if there's any good news in what you're hearing today, this should not necessarily be new information for Prince William Sound. However, we do know that landslides and glacial fjords within Prince William Sound have created local tsunamis, and some of them have been very big. So what I like to do, first of all, is just remind you, you have the tools to be safe already. And a lot of this is going to be your natural warning signs. If you feel a very strong earthquake, if you see the water withdraw or advance at an unusual distance, or you hear a strange rumble or roar, a sound that doesn't make sense because you all are on the water, you're near the water, you know what your environment is normally like. When those things don't square up and they're not the same for you, take that as a natural warning sign and move to higher ground. There could be a tsunami approaching. The trouble that we're having with this situation is the National Tsunami Warning Center and a lot of the tools that we have to monitor for tsunamis are based on a seismic situation that is an earthquake-driven ocean wave. Generally, how tsunamis work is a seismic shift happens, the ocean floor is disrupted, and that happens quickly, displaces a lot of water, just like you moving your hand quickly in the bathtub. Those waves move out in all directions, and some of them can travel as fast as 500, 600 miles per hour. When the wave gets closer to shallow water, the physics of that compresses, and the actual wave can build in height. As the wave height gets taller, it changes the currents. It creates debris flows out into the water. Some of those can break as they move closer to water. This is not what we're talking about for Barry Arm. This is a seismic tsunami that you're looking at on your screen, and what the National Tsunami Warning Center is designed to monitor for and warn for. We're talking about a landslide-driven tsunami, and that is a totally different animal. So again, the natural warning signs may be your best solution for today. If you feel an earthquake, we don't know if the earthquake could help to release the landslide or not. It's possible. But if you see a sudden rise or fall of the ocean that doesn't match up with the tidal cycle that you're aware of, or you hear some loud noise if you're in the vicinity of Barry Arm, those could be a sign that a tsunami could be moving out and away from Barry Arm or really any other glacial fjord in Prince William Sound. So what are we doing about this? Last April, we learned from the academic group that Barry Arm had shown some significant motion over a long period of time, nothing immediate in that April timeframe. In about June, the National Tsunami Warning Center was able to organize a site survey to see where we could start putting some type of water level sensor into the ground, next to the water and under the water, to better monitor any wave that was leaving Barry Arm should a landslide occur. And later in the summer, the preliminary modeling started happening at the National Tsunami Warning Center. And what Gabe was showing you there was the first rough modeling there from Dr. Lynette, showing the potential for the speed of any wave leaving Barry Arm, as well as the potential inundation or how high that wave could be. That was the first rough estimate there, and any new information we have about the bathymetry, about the shape of the slope and the terrain, all of that will be used to further enhance and improve that modeling. The Tsunami Warning Center has done some rough modeling as well, and we've confirmed the time, but one thing that we're still not very sure about is how high some of those waves could be. And so we'd like to continue working on that as we go forward. But that started in the late summer. And by the time we got through late winter, we had permitting from the U.S. Forest Service, who is the landowner in the places where we like to install gauges in those areas, and got approval to do that. Unfortunately, by the time that that happened and made it through all of the different groups, as was required, it was too late in the winter season to safely get out and onto the rocks and spend a sizable amount of the day per each station getting that instrumentation in there. With the weather and with the tidal cycle, which is critical, we'll have to delay that until late spring, early summer before we can actually get these gauges into the water. And what we're really watching for, it's not just the weather, of course, which can be pretty rough this time of year, but the lowest tidal cycle that we can find is coming up, I believe, in late April for that time of the year. And that's critical to get the installation of the sensors in just the right and most efficient position that will give us the best information for the longest amount of time. So it's not just about waiting for the weather and waiting for a window where the rocks aren't frozen over, but really watching for the tidal cycle to be the most opportune moment there. The other thing I'd like to point out too is once we have some gauges in the water, it does not instantly equal a monitoring solution for Barry Arm. We will start receiving data once everything's plugged in and turned on. However, while we're moving to this point in our timeline, we're also working on ways to analyze that information that we will be receiving and turning that into some actionable level of information that we can provide a warning for. Remember, I said this is something that we haven't done before. This doesn't match up with the current situation that we're designed to work for. And because of that, we have to design something that's going to use this information and help us understand it in a useful way, and then turn that around into a quick warning for you in Prince William Sound. Right now, that does not exist. So just because we get sticks or gauges in the water doesn't mean we're going to have that solution ready immediately, and that will take some time. So once again, we're talking about an area northeast of Whittier. Our plan is to install at least 3 gauges initially. That will happen hopefully in April. And the goal of that is to simply detect that a significant water level change has occurred, to send that signal to the National Tsunami Warning Center. The National Tsunami Warning Center will issue an alert that something has changed there, and that will likely take place in the form of a tsunami warning. For Valdez, that could look a little bit different since your water level may not be as significant as that in Whittier. But we think that our best place, let's see, I'm going to move my window around a little bit here so I can see what I'm talking about, pardon me. Our area there in Barry Arm that we're watching for, you can see the Barry Arm East sensor. That's the northernmost sensor closest to the glacier, and pretty much in the same vicinity there as some of the sensors and seismometers, including a remote camera that Gabe was talking about. The next sensor would be a little bit further down at Point Duran, and then perhaps 2 more there at the North Shore and the very southern end of the Barry Arm area before you get into Port Wells. And this is just one suggestion of, well, this is our permitted site strategy at this point. There could be additional sites in the future. So what are we talking about putting in? Tsunami gauge is a very simple and sturdy device. Our electronics technicians have designed this to be rugged and durable in the Alaska environment, and these exist already in many other places down the Alaska coastline, especially the Alaska Peninsula out into the Aleutians. So it is rugged. They don't need a lot of maintenance, and they seem to hold up fairly well. Basically, it's a device that sits under the water and is attached to a cable up on the shore, but under the water, you have a device that senses a sudden change in the water simply by the weight or the pressure on that sensor. That information is relayed back in a very short amount of time, so we can tell that something has changed quickly and unusually that is not appropriate for the tidal cycle, or a boat going over, something like that. And when you see a series of these, as we expect we would see in Barry Arm, if the first one changes and then in a few moments later, the next one changes to the south and then the next one changes in the south, we think that'll give us a fairly decent idea that something significant is happening there and that could require a warning. One thing to point out is that there are weather buoys of different types and origins in Prince William Sound. And I know there's some buoys in near Valdez. There's one in Port Wells, but these are weather buoys. They're not designed to monitor for tsunamis. Unfortunately, we wish they were. Any more information that we could provide and detect in this situation would certainly be a help. One thing Gabe touched on was the NOAA Coast Survey and the USGS survey there of Buried Arm, detecting some of the more recent changes there prior to what was able to be accomplished this past summer. I believe the most recent survey was back in the early 90s, maybe 1990 there from NOAA ship Rainier. So it's been a really long time since that information had been updated. So that was a critical improvement to the process. And so the question that we've heard from a lot of folks around Whittier is the water deep enough in Barry Arm for a tsunami to occur? And we think now that the answer is yes. What we need to understand better, and we'll continue to see this as an evolving process, is understanding the bathymetry in that area, and any changes that continue to occur will shape that wave, will shape how much water is available for a wave to leave Barry Arm. And all of that is 100% dependent on how much rock or landslide is falling into the water for that to occur and start the process anyway. So there's a lot of variables here, and we can't say definitively for every situation, this is how big the tsunami could be in Valdez or Whittier, and this is how long it will take to get there. Right now, we think that there could be a series of waves in the Valdez area that could put as much as 2 to 3 feet of water into unusual places, places that don't match up with the tidal cycle. But right now, based on the limited information that we have, we're not sure that there would be significant damage in or around Valdez. So maybe there's some good news there. The main threat for that area would probably be long and strong, unusual currents in Port Valdez, around the Arm, and really throughout the rest of Prince William Sound. And that's fairly specific to the eastern side of Prince William Sound. Places like Tititlic may see a considerably different situation, as well as Chenega. Whittier has been in the news because this situation could produce considerably higher water into Whittier. But for all of these locations, it's not just one wave. It would be a series of waves and several hours of strange, unusual, dangerous currents that could pull debris out into the water, create hazards to navigation, and generally just make things pretty difficult for cleanup for a long period of time after that, even if there's not significant damage on land. The thing I want you to remember is that it's not just one wave, and there will be effects in the water for many hours following this event. So we talked about some initial modeling that the Tsunami Warning Center did, and we shared this here in the form of, it's kind of a rainbow map here, so bear with me for a minute. If you can see my cursor, I'll redirect your attention to Barry Arm, and that would be in the northwestern or the top left corner of your screen there in the plot. The 3 stars are the places that we hope to put gauges in. And you can see the hot red colors where we think we'll see the quickest response in a tsunami wave reaching initially. So this would be the places that we see the wave first in the dark red. And Whittier would be one of those first places there, probably in about 20 minutes or less. The further east and south you go, of course, you would expect to see a longer time from when that wave arrives. And right now, around Valdez, we see that time anywhere from about 40 to 50 minutes or so. Cordova is in the zone of about 70 to 80 minutes, so a little bit longer than an hour. The outside area of Hitchenbrook entrance, is closer to about 40 to 50 minutes. Chenega is a little bit under 40 minutes. Our greatest challenge and concern is giving as much lead time as possible for people and the boats and ships to get out of the way or to secure things and get to safe harbor. Right now, Whittier has the least amount of time for that to be possible. And so that is my greatest concern. I right now am not comfortable with how little time is available to issue a warning and have people respond appropriately. In Valdez, though, that's a much different case. You're looking at about 30 minutes from the time that we could detect a wave to the time that that initial impact would reach Port Valdez and Valdez Arm. And the same goes for Titlik and Chanika. There's considerably greater time, in fact, almost double the amount of time there. And Cordova, again, well over an hour, it looks like, before something would reach closer to Cordova. So we have a lot to think about here. The most important thing for you, I think, is how will you know that something has occurred? The National Tsunami Warning Center, whether it's a seismic tsunami, something that's occurred from an earthquake in Prince William Sound or around the area, or a landslide tsunami, we're going to issue a tsunami warning. That would be the most likely thing for Whittier, especially. We're still looking at information to decide if that would be a tsunami advisory for areas in the eastern parts of Prince William Sound. We're not committed to either solution just yet, but you will receive some type of alert. That alert will arrive to you over NOAA weather radio, marine VHF, cell phone, wireless emergency alert, radio, television, internet sites will probably broadcast that information to you. There is a tsunami siren in Whittier, and through work with Aaron Basic there in Valdez, I know he's encouraged and interested in looking at improving the tsunami readiness there for Valdez itself. These are the alert levels that the Tsunami Warning Center uses on a daily basis: warning, advisory, watch, and an information statement. A warning would be the highest level of alert. An information statement would be our lowest non-threat message there. A watch simply means that we don't have enough information yet and more information is coming. That could lead to a warning or advisory, or that could mean an all clear is coming. So a warning, again, would be most likely what we would issue for Whittier. But most of the time, the information that you see from the National Tsunami Warning Center is that an information statement has been issued, simply acknowledging that, yes, an earthquake has occurred, and no, we don't think there's any danger from this. And we've issued several of those just in the last week. You've probably seen signs like this before around Prince William Sound. The tsunami evacuation route should be something that I hope you're very familiar with and know what it means and have followed those arrows at least once in your life, just to practice where you would go if a significant wave were to occur. Again, I think it's important to remind you that debris may interrupt normal operations for big ships, small boats, any operations you're doing. The debris may be one of the more significant things that are an issue there around Valdez. And dangerous and unusual currents would continue for several hours after that. For people near the coastline, it's important to remember where you are at each point in your day and to start thinking about how do you move away from the coast and get to safe territory quickly and with little notice. It's a good thing to make a plan with your family and friends and practice that. It's simple psychology. We know that when we practice these things, it's a lot easier to remember that. When you get into that fight or flight mode, when you just think about it here in a talk like this today, if you haven't practiced that and actually had that discussion with people that you'll be around in an emergency situation, it's a lot harder to remember how to do those things when the time really comes. I would encourage you from here on out to participate in community meetings like this one about Barry Arm and the landslide risk. The information is organized on the website that Gabe showed there. Again, if you just search Barry Arm and State of Alaska, you should be able to find it very quickly. Stay up to date on that information and continue to ask questions, especially from your operations or from your point of view. This is, again, something that the agencies from the federal, state, and the local side have not done in this way and are not designed to work together to solve this particular problem. So we have a lot of things to get right. We have a lot of questions that remain unanswered, and we have a lot of work to do just to get to the summer alone. And again, your simple natural warning signs for right now, especially, may be some of your best solutions. If you feel a strong earthquake, see the water withdrawing or advance or an unusual distance, or you hear it sounding, making some sound that doesn't make sense for where you are, start moving to high ground. That would be your best and safest solution. And of course, hopefully a warning would come your way and tell you whether or not something's occurred and give you an all clear or continue to push you toward a safer solution as you go. I believe that is the end of my presentation there, and I will, let's see, unshare my screen, and Gabe and I can answer any questions that you might have if there's time. If I can figure out how to do this. Sorry, guys. Let's see.
While we're waiting, it looks like Thane Miller had a question.
Yeah, good evening, or good afternoon, Dave. You did a pretty good job of describing how the citizens of Prince William Sound would receive the warnings. Could you describe how the Tsunami Warning Center will get the warnings out? You know, is the Tsunami Warning Center staffed 24 hours? Are they automated? Is it possible? My main concern, I've got many main concerns, but one concern I have is the 10 to 15 people that live and work at Esther Hatchery there in Lake Bay. I'm wondering if it's possible for them to get a direct phone call, but you know, if the systems are automated because you're not manned 24 hours. I was wondering if you could go into that at all.
Really good question, and I should answer that right off the top, so thank you for asking. Yes, the National Tsunami Warning Center is a 24/7, 365 warning operation. We have 2 people in the office around the clock right now. When we're not in COVID operations, of course, that's a greater number, especially during the day. But we are prepared to respond to an event in under 5 minutes. So what that means is if we detect an earthquake, which is what we're designed for right now, that our expectation would be that we would send some type of message that says an earthquake has occurred and this is a dangerous situation or it is not a dangerous situation. Typically those alerts begin around a magnitude 4 or so. It depends on where they are, around Alaska especially. And that alert would travel to you over NOAA weather radio. There's a lot of different options you have. I'm not sure, you said Esther Island, is that right?
Esther Hatchery is at Lake Bay on the southwest corner of Esther Island.
Yeah, so thinking about that situation, it would be important to find some way that could be listening for an alert notification 24 hours a day. And be able to wake you up if it's in the middle of the night, or rumble your phone, or whatever it takes. And each one of those situations is going to be pretty unique, but there are a lot of options out there to get a signal like that to you and provide an alert. But from our end, we're 24/7, 365.
Okay, thank you.
Sure thing. And let's see, how should we handle the questions? I see a lot of hands up there, and would you like us to just?
Robert, you're muted.
We'll go ahead with Wayne Donaldson while Robert unmutes. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Nice to see you at a different time of day. Used to watching you about 7 o'clock on aviation weather. So, but my question, you probably might have said this, I might have missed it. How high would is there an estimated height of a tsunami wave coming out of Barry Arm? Have you been able to do that yet?
So I think the initial modeling showed that. I'm trying to remember. Let's see, Gabe, if you're on, do you remember the number in Barry Arm? The real impact is, of course, going to be other places outside of that there. But
the reason why I asked was because I'm just wondering if there could be secondary effects where it generates another landslide in another nearby location or ripping apart another glacier in the nearby area, that then all that debris material might flood out into the sound.
Yeah, I can address that somewhat. The actual situation in the fjord will be, I mean, depending on how much of the mass is released at one time. If we consider the scenario that we discussed previously, if there was a rapid and full-scale release of the instability as we have recognized it, it's a very large mass that would be plunging into the water. This is the worst case scenario. In other situations in Alaska, when we have seen the results of that, it's been absolute devastation in the fjord, up to several hundred feet on either side. And then that destruction is carried, away for some miles. So you're absolutely right. Locally, it would be quite devastating, and the impacts could be, carried on through other slope failures in the area. It could cause large calving from other tidewater glaciers in the area. And that's the worst case scenario. Again, it's just it's not a good place to be when there's a several 100-foot wave that could be generated if there was a full failure of the slope. And I should caution the description here, the interpretation with the idea is we still don't know how this slope is behaving. We don't know if it would be a full failure, but just responding to your question in the example that was shown with the modeling by Pat Lynette, that was a full slope rapid failure. And those would be the conditions in the fjord if that were the case.
Thank you.
Mike Bender.
Hi, thanks. Thank you both for such a nice presentation. I represent Whittier here on the RCAC board, and of course, I'm very, very interested. I just have a couple of questions. Do you happen to know what stage of the tide is when that simulation is run? Is it medium tide, low tide, high tide? Because the three terminal moraines between the glacier there and until it reaches Port Wells, I think are going to be our best defense as it is right now for a big wave.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, Mike. I think in some ways, as Dave was saying, this is the first, coarse representation of what that failure could look like if it's a full rapid failure. We are really interested in refining that and providing the tsunami modelers with more detailed and accurate information so that we can begin to understand those things, such as changes in tides and understanding how the tide cycle really does impact this. But yeah, we don't have the information right now. I'm sorry.
All right. Can I ask just one more question?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the buoy that's there in Port Wells, 46081, is there a possibility of adding a tsunami pack to it? I mean, some additional instrumentation that could detect a tsunami to it's an already existing structure there. So has anybody investigated that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think initially the answer is probably not. The dark buoys that are out across the coastal areas of Alaska versus the weather buoy that's there in Port Wells are set up completely differently. However, we have had conversations just this week with some other folks in different parts of our own agency that have been investigating different types of buoys that might be better designed for something like that on a smaller scale deployment and maybe in the right spot there in Barry Arm. And again, that's all very preliminary and exploratory, but those conversations are happening in different ways, but probably not directed right there at the Port Wells weather buoy.
Very good. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Thanks, Mike. Jim Herbert.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. You did a great job. Your team has put together an impressive effort here. But I just do want to acknowledge that Dr. Higman and some of his people really kind of got the ball rolling with their early detection here. And I also appreciate their early work, but you guys are carrying the water now. So that kind of work off of that, do you folks feel that your funding from the government is considered priority funding on this? You've invested in this, obviously. How's it going to be going out? Do you think with the spring thaw, we're all going to get nervous again, that something's going to let loose and that'll raise the anxiety level? But overall, do you think your efforts will continue to be funded? Thank you very much.
Gabe, maybe if you talk about the federal stuff and I talk about the state stuff, we'll both be safe. Is that how that works?
That's a good exchange. Yeah, this is a really difficult question to ask or to answer. But I guess I can say safely that there is a tremendous amount of interest in making sure that there is continued activity in this area. And I wouldn't say that if I didn't see that activity happening right as we speak. In fact, one thing that's really positive is the passing of the Landslide Preparedness Act, and this provides funding to the U.S. Geological Survey to put some effort into landslides across the United States. But there's language in there that specifically identifies Prince William Sound and the Barry Arm. And so there are dollars that are meant to go directly to this. And so I think we have some good people looking out for us to make sure that continued funding to look into this, to look into these really significant issues are coming our way.
And I'll piggyback off of what Gabe says, and I'll try and speak as plainly but also carefully as I can, because I'm not a budget person. I do not sign the checks, and I don't make the direction about where the federal money goes for efforts like this. A lot of what Gabe was referencing there for money being directed is for the USGS side and the agency there to monitor the landslide, and however they do that is up to people above the USGS to direct that. As far as NOAA goes, we have a lot of paragraphs about where our money is going, and there is a dollar figure attached to those paragraphs. I have a paragraph in front of me that speaks to Barry Arm without any dollars attached to it. So we call that an unfunded mandate. But it does direct NOAA to work with other relevant federal agencies, state of Alaska, local governments, and stakeholders to monitor and warn on the Barry Arm and develop strategic locations of sensors and inundation models to inform emergency planning efforts. So we have instructions, but the rest of that's a little bit more up in the air.
Good.
Yes, sir.
Jim Herbert, did you have something else? Okay. Dorothy Moore. You're muted, Dorothy.
I got to get myself unmuted here. Thank you for this presentation. I enjoyed it immensely. And I just have to give you a couple of kudos about how you've gone about this. As a council member, I grew up in Valdez, and I can remember in 1955 we had an earthquake, and I can remember looking out the window in my classroom and seeing the trucks that were running down the road kind of going like this. And then I was a freshman college student home for 1964 earthquake, and I walked along the ocean the next day. As I don't have a degree behind me, but the idea of tsunamis has always been something that I just dive into. After the 1964 earthquake, I could, for about 3 years, tell you when there was an earthquake coming and tell you which direction, and it was because of my hearing. I would suggest that you put hearing up first rather than last in your presentation. But I really think that it's going to be a disturbance of waves with an S rather than a disturbance of water that is going to slosh around depending on the lay of the bottom of the ocean. And I also would want to continue to work with people in Valdez. You mentioned someone that you had been talking to. I think that the council and every group needs to see your demonstration in Valdez. But could you tell me who was the person in Valdez that you're dealing with?
Yeah, Aaron Basic with the police department.
Police, okay.
Mhm.
Thank you, and yeah, very, very good presentation, because tsunamis are not the design of that Japanese person with the huge wave.
That's right. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dorothy. Ben Cottrell.
Hi, thanks. My name is Ben. I represent Geological Alaska Corporation. So this issue is something we're following very closely because our communities are, Titilik, New Chiniga, and Valdez. So really appreciate the update. I just had a kind of a question that I'm not really sure on because I'm not a geology major, but are controlled landslides, is that a discussion that's being talked about? Is that common practice? That's my first question.
Sure, it's a really good question. The short answer is no, it's not a common practice, and it's really not part of the discussion in this case. The fact of the matter is this landslide, this entire unstable slope area is absolutely massive, and it's just not a workable situation for this size of a slope to try to control it, to try to have some active mitigation to release it in a controlled way. The dangers, of course, would be, you don't have any control if you release it. And this is actually one of our concerns. If one small part of the slope goes, then we don't have any real way right now of knowing if the remainder of the slope will go, or another significant part. So we're really working hard and trying to figure that out. And we've identified with our USGS colleagues some of these individual parts of the main slope that we think might be moving a little independently. But triggering, one or part of one of those would be, completely uncontrollable. There's no way we could do it. Furthermore, I don't know that well, two things. One, what it would take to get it to go. Nobody knows that. And so it would be really challenging and dangerous work. The other part of it is just the liability. If you consider something like this, you have no idea what you're going to unleash. And the destruction that would come from that would be something that it would be really challenging for communities to prepare for, and other authorities to prepare for the impacts to infrastructure, even if you could clear out the sound. So it's a really big issue, but it's really not one that we can handle by direct mitigation.
Great, thanks. My next one is an easy question. Is it possible to get copies of the PowerPoints that were presented today so I can report back?
Of course.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we did send those to Donna,
I've got them.
I guess.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, we've got them, and we'll get them loaded on the website and pushed out to you, Ben. Thanks.
That's great. That's a great PowerPoint. So moving on, Amanda Bauer.
Hey, thanks, Robert. And thanks for the great presentation. I have a question, not that I'm not concerned about, the Northeast and the Eastern side of the Sound, but just trying to think of RCAC's mandate, where we're at, and things over here on the, on this northern side of the Sound over here. Are you looking at any other areas where this could happen in the Sound? I mean, obviously, most of our glaciers are retreating at this point, and That leads me to think of Columbia Glacier, which has retreated 14 miles, in the last 40 years, and the slopes back there. And that fjord, of course, leads right out to our shipping lanes in the precautionary zone where the pilot transfer happens. And so are you looking at other areas in the Sound as well where this may be an issue?
Yeah, this is a really important question. You're absolutely right. If this is happening there, it's likely happening in other places. And really, we don't know yet. One thing's for sure, glaciers are retreating, permafrost is thawing, and it's setting the stage for this behavior. We know this, and there are other studies elsewhere throughout South Central and Southeast Alaska. Alaskans can witness this with their own eyes. It's happening all over the place. People who are out on the water know this better than most. We currently do not have funding in place to look in all these different areas of the state to identify ahead of time where these landslides might be. We are working with colleagues and working through the academic sector to try to get funding to do something like this. And so this is where we sit right now. But I'll have to reiterate, this is extremely important that we do this, that we really try to identify these different areas, get a handle on them before they occur so that we can save lives and resources.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. And just to correct myself, I meant the communities of Western Prince William Sound earlier. I think I said Eastern. So thank you for that. And yeah, it would be nice if we could get other areas looked at. As I said, just try to find ways where we can help contribute as an organization that kind of falls in our mandate a little better. But I do understand the constraints, especially in an area so big.
Yeah, so you actually, I'll just follow up with that. You brought up a really good point. Bringing in stakeholders, bringing in individuals in general to help contribute to this is an extremely important part. Again, lots of you are out on the water. Lots of you are looking at the landscape all the time. I have friends who used to fish in the Upper Barry Arm area. It's the personal accounts of the changing in the landscape that really help identify some of these places. And I will come back to the way we identified, the way we started working on the Barry Arm is because a colleague of ours, so Brentwood Higman, whom was mentioned before, his sister was in Barry Arm and took a picture and showed it to Hig, and she asked, hey, is this an unstable slope? I know you work on this kind of stuff. That's how we discovered that. And so we need to do better about that. That is one way that we can do this, is by really getting information from the folks who are out there and helping guide the work that we do. But we have some other ways that we plan to do this too. And the real key part here is having the funding in place to be able to do it on a large scale. But we're working with lots of different partners, Hig being one of them, and others in the academic sector, to try to do this across South Central and Southeast Alaska.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for that. And as you probably know, Brentwood is working with state parks on the Grunk Glacier issue in the Homer area, which is rather frightful also. So we're keeping an eye on that one. Robert Beadle.
Yes, thank you, and great presentation. I appreciate all the work that's being done to monitor it, but has there been much thought given into response to an event? I know at certain times of the years there's hundreds of sport, commercial, charter in that immediate area. Has there been given a lot of or much thought to what would happen after an event?
Yeah, that's a significant concern because there's a lot of different types of users for that area, especially. It's a high traffic area, and it looks a lot different today than it would, say, on a normal July, right? Especially if there's a cruise ship in town. So not only are we concerned about the response on land, but also the response for those on the water. And having clear and actionable and useful information to provide as a resource to anybody, no matter what situation they're in, whether it's Mike's crew out there, taking people up Barry Arm, or just your weekend warrior from Anchorage. People need to know exactly what to do and quickly, because time will be critical for response. And that, of course, is if everything works exactly as designed, and that information moves as fast as we hope it can. In other parts of the sound, of course, it's going to be a lot different. You will have more time to respond than what you'll have there in Whittier. And making sure that we're working with the Coast Guard, the harbor masters, and other operators in port to understand what that could look like and what that means hours after the event has occurred will be an ongoing process there. This is, since we're in the initial stages of understanding the problem, those methods and actions are just kind of spinning up, but they're also not a lot different than the information that's already out there if a seismic tsunami occurred. So it's important to refresh that within your group. And if that's something that your group needs to hear more from us or from the Coast Guard or anybody else, I'm happy to help push that in the right direction with you. But please let us know.
Okay, yeah, the place is just incredible. It's beautiful out there, and I see Anchorage, it's their backyard, and a lot of people enjoy it. But it can be pretty busy at times. So just curious of what, maybe, I'll look more into and bring it to my community. Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Beadle, just so you know, we have not had a lot of contact with Cordova yet about this problem. I think we have had some folks from the city on a call, but it has not been a routine event. So if there's a way that we can encourage that and keep your part of Alaska a little bit better informed routinely, I'm all for it.
Well, there's 3 organizations. CDFU, there's Patience, she's on there. She's the rep from there. PISWAC, Thane Miller, they have hatcheries there, and then of course the city of Cordova. There's a lady in Cordova named Heather Brannon. She's our emergency response contact. But Heather Brannon. Oh, there's Patience maybe. Okay, well, thank you, and just hopefully it's sloughs instead of avalanches.
Sir.
Thanks, Robert. Mike Bender.
Hi, just one more question, Dave. Does NOAA still have the ability, can't they tone through a VHF radio to provide, it used to be weather alerts, but I think they could activate a tone through the VHF radio. Is that, am I remembering that right?
Yes, sir. That's the NOAA weather radio there. And that is our primary means of communication and sending out the emergency alert to all of Alaska. So that's still the process we use. So if you don't have a NOAA weather radio, they're pretty inexpensive by, if you've got devices on your ship or your boat, NOAA weather radio is pretty cheap stuff if you're going to add something like that to your house. It can sit there idly 24 hours a day and listen for a special tone. And once that tone comes on, it will light up your radio and make a lot of noise and turn on the audible message. And it can be a life-saving device around Alaska there. The trick is that the reception for that it is not all of Alaska by any means. Like a lot of our communications, it's focused on population. So marine VHF would be better out on the water probably, unless you're in port. And then NOAA weather radio would be a little bit easier to use as well as in town. Is that what you're looking for, Mike?
Yeah, I always sleep now with mine is always on. So I'd rather be woken up in the middle of the night by idle chatter and instead of miss the tsunami warning. Thanks again for your presentation, guys.
Yes, sir.
Any more questions? I don't see any more hands raised, fellas. So Dave Snider and Gabe Wolken, thank you so much. It was a great presentation and very valuable.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much.